My name is Camille Duran. I'm 31 years old. On Sunday, May 11, 2025 at 2:14 p.m. My mother-in-law stood at the head of her mahogany dining table in a silk navy dress, lifted her champagne glass and said in front of 23 people, "Before we toast this baby, I think we should all be honest about whether it actually belongs to my son." She said it lightly, almost elegantly, like she was introducing a dessert course instead of detonating my life in the middle of Mother's Day brunch. I remember every detail of that room. The white peonies arranged too tightly in crystal vases. The gold flatware lined with military precision. The soft clink of ice against glass in my father-in-law's tumbler. The way my husband, Adrian, went completely still beside me, one hand resting against the back of my chair, not touching me, not defending me, just there. As if silence could somehow pass for neutrality. Evelyn Mercer was 62, immaculate, charitable in public, ruthless in private. The kind of woman who wore cream cashmere in spring and spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had spent 40 years making other people doubt themselves. Her husband had built a regional construction empire. She had built the family mythology around it. Legacy. Bloodline. Reputation. The Mercers didn't just attend charity galas and country club dinners. They curated them. They moved through our city like they owned part of its oxygen. I was not born into that kind of air. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment over my aunt's nail salon in El Paso. My mother taught 3rd grade for 27 years. My father repaired HVAC units until his knees gave out. I learned early how to stretch a dollar, iron a blouse without scorching it, and smile politely when people made assumptions about your worth based on your zip code. By 31, I was a neonatal nurse practitioner at St. Agnes, making good money, working brutal hours, and carrying my first child 7 months into a marriage that, from a distance, looked stable enough to photograph. From a distance, a lot of things do. When Evelyn made her toast, no one laughed. That would have required a kind of honesty this family didn't possess. Instead, there was that careful stillness wealthy people mistake for dignity. My sister-in-law Laurel looked down at her plate. My father-in-law took a slow sip of bourbon and said nothing. Adrian's cousin muttered, "Jesus," under his breath, but quietly enough that no one would have to acknowledge it later. I should tell you this now. By the time Evelyn accused me of carrying another man's baby, I already knew something was wrong in that family. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough to understand that this wasn't really about me cheating. It was about control. More specifically, it was about blood. Who belonged to the Mercer name? Who had the right to carry it forward? And who, in Evelyn's mind, was contaminating it? What I didn't know yet was that 2 weeks later, the DNA test she demanded would come back and rip open a secret her family had buried for 34 years. But to understand how I got there, you have to understand the Mercers, and the kind of woman you become when a family decides you are useful enough to marry into, but never worthy enough to trust. I met Adrian Mercer on November 3, 2022, at 8:40 p.m. in the emergency department waiting room at St. Agnes. His father had collapsed during a donor banquet. Dehydration, arrhythmia, too much scotch and too little dinner. Nothing fatal. But Adrian stayed with him until after midnight, still in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent at the time, answering work calls in the hallway and thanking every nurse by name. He was handsome in the polished, unthreatening way certain men are. Clean watch. Quiet voice. Good posture. The kind of man who seemed safe because he had been trained his whole life to never make a mess in public. He sent flowers to the unit 3 days later. Then coffee. Then a note. By Christmas we were dating. Evelyn disliked me almost immediately. Not openly at first. Women like her rarely begin with the knife. They begin with the silk wrapped around it. At our first dinner at their house, she looked at the bottle of wine I brought and smiled. "How thoughtful," she said. "I always forget people from practical backgrounds don't realize we keep a cellar." At the time, Adrian squeezed my knee under the table and whispered later, "That's just how she is." That should have been my first clue. It wasn't. By February, she was asking whether my schedule at the hospital would allow me to properly support a husband. By April, she was telling people I was lovely but intense. At our engagement dinner in September, she leaned across the candlelight and asked if my family would be comfortable attending an event at the club, as if valet parking might count as a cultural shock. I stayed quiet. Then I stayed polite. Then, without meaning to, I stayed available. Because Adrian kept asking me to be patient. Because every cruelty came wrapped in plausible deniability. Because his father never intervened, which made Evelyn seem less malicious and more inevitable. And because when you love someone, you can talk yourself into mistaking their weakness for conflict avoidance. That was my second clue. I would understand how expensive it was later. By the time we got married in October 2024, I had already learned the Mercer family choreography. Evelyn made the cuts. Adrian minimized them. Laurel pretended not to notice. Charles Mercer, my father-in-law, stayed behind his newspaper, his bourbon or his phone, depending on the hour. And everyone else followed the mood of the room like it was weather. If Evelyn was warm, they were warm. If she froze you out, the temperature dropped for everyone. The wedding itself should have told me everything. It was held at the Belmont House, a restored estate outside the city with limestone columns, clipped hedges, and a ballroom full of white orchids. Evelyn insisted on choosing herself because, in her words, a family wedding should feel like a continuation of legacy, not a personality experiment. She said it while looking directly at me. I let her pick the flowers. I let her trim the guest list. I let her move my mother from the front table to a quieter placement near the back because she said the seating had to reflect hosting hierarchy. My mother smiled through all of it in a navy dress she bought on clearance and told me not to worry, that what mattered was the marriage, not the production around it. I wanted to believe that. Then, 37 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, Evelyn came into the bridal suite, looked at the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me and said, "Those are sweet, but I've brought something more appropriate." More appropriate. Not more beautiful. Not more formal. Appropriate. She opened a velvet box with a pair of diamond drops inside. Family jewels, she explained. Worn by Mercer brides. Then she added in that same soft voice, "It's important people can tell when a woman has truly entered the family." At the time I thought it was just another power move. I didn't yet understand how literal she was being. I wore the earrings. That should have been my third clue. For the first 3 months of marriage, things settled into something almost normal. Adrian and I moved into a house in Preston Hollow his father had helped us purchase, which was Mercer language for we signed the mortgage, but the down payment came with invisible strings. I worked 4 12-hour shifts most weeks. Adrian handled commercial acquisitions for the family business, which meant long lunches, closed-door meetings, and phone calls he always seemed to take outside. He wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruel men are easier to identify. Easier to leave. Adrian was careful. Agreeable. He kissed my forehead in the mornings. Remembered how I took my coffee. Texted when he'd be late. And yet every time his mother crossed a line, he developed this maddening ability to turn concrete injuries into abstract misunderstandings. She didn't mean it like that. You know how mom gets. Just let it go. It's not worth the blow-up. That sentence. It's not worth the blow-up. Women like me get taught to fear becoming the problem. Men like Adrian get rewarded for treating peace like something women are supposed to manufacture for them. By January, Evelyn had moved on from my background to my body. We were at Sunday dinner, roast chicken and rosemary potatoes, the usual ritual, when she set down her fork, looked at my untouched second helping and said, "Well, at least you're being disciplined now. That will matter when it's time." I looked up. Time for what? She smiled. Babies, Camille. Mercer babies photograph beautifully, but only if their mothers exercise restraint beforehand. Laurel laughed into her wineglass. Not because it was funny. Because that family used laughter the way other people use napkins. To clean up what they didn't want sitting out in the open. I said nothing. But on the drive home, I asked Adrian if he heard what she said. He kept his eyes on the road. She's obsessed with appearances. That wasn't about appearances. He exhaled. Camille. No. Don't do that thing where you make me feel dramatic for hearing exactly what she said. His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. I'm saying she doesn't know when to stop. That's different. At the time, I let the conversation die there. I shouldn't have. Because once Evelyn realized I wanted children, she stopped disguising what she was doing. She didn't just want influence over my life. She wanted custodianship over whatever came out of my body. She asked invasive questions about my cycle, my appointments, my vitamins. She started recommending the right specialists before there was even a problem. She sent articles about maternal age as if I were already behind. She once left a brochure for a private genetics clinic on our kitchen island with a sticky note that read, "For peace of mind, darling. Darling." By March 2025, I was pregnant. 7 weeks. Then 9. Then 12. Long enough for the fear to soften into shape. Long enough for me to start believing the future might be mine before Evelyn got her hands on it. I cried the first time I heard the heartbeat. Adrian cried too. Real tears. Quiet ones. For one suspended afternoon in a dim exam room, his hand wrapped around mine, I thought maybe this child would finally force him to become someone firmer. Someone harder to bend. That was my fourth clue. Not because it was false. Because it was incomplete. When we told his parents, Charles stood and hugged Adrian first. Then me. Briefly. Politely. Evelyn pressed both hands to her chest and said, "How wonderful." With exactly the right amount of feeling. She called 3 friends before dessert. Sent orchids the next morning. Posted nothing publicly, which surprised me, because women like her usually treated family milestones like branding opportunities. Now I know why. At 16 weeks, she began referring to the baby as our little Mercer heir. Not grandchild. Heir. The first time she said it, I corrected her lightly. Maybe heiress. She smiled. Let's hope not. The business is complicated. I glanced at Adrian, expecting at least a flicker of discomfort. He just reached for more sparkling water. That should have been my 5th clue. Then came April 17th, Thursday. 6:32 p.m. I remember because I had just gotten home from a 14-hour shift and was standing barefoot in our kitchen, eating salted crackers over the sink when Evelyn called Adrian. He put it on speaker without realizing I was in the room. Her voice arrived crisp and immediate. "Have you handled it?" He lowered the volume, but not before I heard him say, "Not yet. I need more time." "Time for what?" she snapped. "Before she starts showing? Before people start asking dates?" I froze. There was a pause. Then Adrian, quieter now. "Mom, not on speaker." My stomach tightened. Not from pregnancy. From instinct. I stepped into the doorway just as he took the call off speaker and walked outside onto the patio. That should have been my 6th clue. At the time, I told myself it could have meant anything. A trust issue. A family announcement. Some controlling, image-obsessed nonsense I didn't yet have context for. But the word stayed with me. Before people start asking dates. Dates for what? I tried to ask him that night. He brushed it off so quickly it almost sounded rehearsed. She was talking about the christening. We haven't even discussed a christening. She gets ahead of herself. Then why did she sound angry? He looked at me for a second too long. Because that's who she is. There it was again. That answer designed to end inquiry without actually addressing it. I let it go outwardly. Inwardly, I started noticing things. I noticed Evelyn asking exactly how many weeks I was at a family lunch, then repeating the number later to Laurel in a lowered voice. I noticed Charles once looking at my stomach with something close to discomfort, then glancing at Adrian as if measuring a resemblance that didn't yet exist. I noticed Adrian becoming weirdly protective of paperwork. Insurance forms. Appointment summaries. Billing envelopes. He had never cared before. Suddenly he was sorting the mail before I saw it. And then there was Laurel. Laurel was 34, recently divorced, permanently lacquered. The kind of woman who made cruelty look accidental because she delivered it with such bored precision. She never attacked directly when Evelyn was in the room. She embellished. Extended. Echoed. At brunch one Saturday, she laid a hand over mine and said, "You know, none of this would feel so tense if you just do the test." I looked at her. "What test?" She blinked as if she had said too much. Then smiled. "Oh, nothing. Mom just thinks a prenatal DNA panel could calm everyone down." Everyone. Not me. Not Adrian. Everyone. I pulled my hand back. Calm everyone down about what? She took a sip of coffee. You really haven't asked yourself why the timeline bothers her? The room went silent so fast it felt staged. Evelyn set down her teacup with exquisite care. Adrian stared at the table. Charles kept chewing, though his jaw had slowed. And that was the moment I understood something I should have understood much earlier. This wasn't a private suspicion living inside Evelyn's head. This was a narrative. And I had just discovered I was the last person in the family to hear it out loud. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't understand what Laurel was implying, because I understood it too clearly. Timeline. She was talking about when I got pregnant, about when Adrian and I had started trying, about the quiet math families like his perform when they want to turn biology into accusation. I felt every eye in that room on me, even the ones that refused to meet mine. What timeline? I asked, keeping my voice even. Laurel tilted her head slightly. You and Adrian got married in October. You announced the pregnancy in March. That's 5 months. 4.5, Evelyn corrected softly. There it was. Precision. Not curiosity. Not concern. Calculation. I turned to Adrian. Say something. He didn't look up. This isn't the place. No, I said, the first crack in my composure slipping through. This is exactly the place. Because your family just implied I cheated on you in the middle of brunch. Evelyn sighed. Like I was the one disrupting something delicate. No one said that, Camille. You didn't have to. A pause. Then she leaned back slightly in her chair, studying me the way someone studies a problem they've already decided the answer to. We're simply asking for clarity, she said. For everyone's peace of mind. Everyone. Again. At the time I thought that was the worst part. It wasn't. The worst part was Adrian. Because instead of shutting it down, instead of standing up, instead of doing the one thing that would have ended it in that moment, he said quietly, maybe we should just do the test. Something inside me shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just moved. Like a door closing in a room I didn't realize I was standing in. You don't actually think? I don't, he said quickly. Too quickly. I just think it would make everything easier. Easier. That word has ruined more women than cruelty ever could. I looked around the table again. Evelyn composed. Laurel watching. Charles silent. Adrian avoiding me. And for the first time since I married into that family, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about truth. This was about control. And they were all waiting to see if I would submit to it. I smiled. Not because I found anything funny. Because I understood something they didn't. Fine, I said. The word landed heavier than I expected. Evelyn's expression softened just slightly, like she had been bracing for resistance and was pleasantly surprised by compliance. Good, she said. I'll have my assistant schedule it. No, I replied, still calm. I'll handle it. That was the moment everything changed. They didn't notice it. Not then. Because from their perspective I had just agreed to their terms. To their narrative. To their test. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't agreeing. I was paying attention. And once you start paying attention in a room like that, you begin to see things that were never meant to be seen. The clinic was scheduled for April 29th, private. Discreet. Of course it was. Evelyn insisted on one of her preferred specialists, a place that didn't advertise, didn't ask unnecessary questions, and definitely didn't make mistakes. I didn't argue. Not about the location. Not about the timing. Not about the fact that she had already called ahead before Adrian even told me the appointment was confirmed. I let everything move exactly the way they wanted it to, because I needed to see how far it went. That should have been my 7th clue. The waiting room was quieter than I expected. Soft gray walls. Minimal art. A faint citrus scent in the air that tried too hard to feel clean. A woman at the front desk who didn't smile but didn't need to. People who came here weren't looking for comfort. They were looking for answers. Evelyn arrived 10 minutes early. Of course she did. She wore cream again. Always cream when she wanted to signal control. Adrian came 5 minutes later, slightly out of breath, like he had rushed but not fast enough to seem desperate. Charles didn't come. Laurel did. That mattered. At the time I didn't know why. We sat in a row. No one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was structured. Like everyone was waiting for something specific to happen. When the nurse called my name, Evelyn stood up with me. I'll come back, she said. No, I replied. She paused. I think it's better if I go alone. For a second something flickered across her face. Not anger. Not exactly. Something closer to recalculation. Then she smiled. Of course. That was the first time I had ever told her no. It felt smaller than I expected. And more important, inside the room everything was clinical, efficient. The nurse explained the process in a voice that sounded practiced but not detached. Blood samples, consent forms, verification, routine. Except it didn't feel routine. Because the entire time, I had this quiet, persistent thought sitting just beneath the surface. This isn't about proving anything. It's about exposing something. I didn't know what yet, but I could feel it. The test itself took less than 15 minutes. The implications would take weeks. When I walked back out, Evelyn stood immediately. How long? She asked. 10 to 14 days, I said. She nodded, satisfied. Like she had just placed an order she expected to arrive exactly as requested. That should have been my 8th clue. The drive home was silent. Adrian kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, like if he focused hard enough on the road, he wouldn't have to look at me. Do you believe them? I asked finally. He didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything I needed to know. I believe, he said slowly, that this will put everything to rest. Everything. Not the accusation. Not the damage. Everything. I turned toward the window. And in that moment, something settled inside me. Not panic. Not anger. Clarity. Because for the first time I stopped trying to fix what was happening and started watching it. The next 10 days moved differently. Slower. Heavier. Every conversation felt layered. Every glance carried weight. Evelyn called twice, both times under the pretense of checking on my health, both times circling back to the same question without asking it directly. How are you feeling? Fine. Any updates from the clinic? No. Good. These things take time. Accuracy matters. Accuracy. Not truth. Accuracy. Laurel texted me once. Just one message. Funny how timing works. No context. No follow-up. Just enough to sit in my head longer than it should have. That should have been my 9th clue. By day 12, I stopped checking my phone every hour. Not because I wasn't waiting, because I understood something I hadn't before. Whatever was coming wasn't just going to answer their question. It was going to answer mine. And I wasn't the only one who knew that. On the morning of May 11th, Mother's Day, the results came in. At 9:17 a.m. Evelyn called Adrian at 9:19. By 11:30, she had arranged a family brunch. And by 2:14 p.m, she was standing at the head of her dining table with a glass of champagne, ready to humiliate me in front of everyone she had carefully selected to witness it. That was the moment you heard at the beginning. What you didn't see was what was already sitting in her inbox when she raised that glass. Or the fact that she hadn't read it carefully enough. Evelyn believed in timing. That was one of the first things I learned about her. She didn't just plan events. She staged them. Controlled who was present, who spoke, who stayed silent. She understood the power of an audience. The weight of witnesses. The difference between a private doubt and a public narrative. So when she raised that glass and questioned the legitimacy of my child in front of 23 people, it wasn't impulsive. It was choreography. What she didn't understand was that she wasn't the only one who had started preparing. When she finished speaking, there was a pause. Not shock. Not outrage. A pause. The kind that happens when people are waiting to see which version of reality they're supposed to believe. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I reached for my water glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down with deliberate care. Because this part mattered. Control first. Then truth. You're right, I said. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Subtly. Confusion moves quieter than conflict. Evelyn's smile tightened just slightly. I'm glad you agree. It's better to address these things directly. I do agree, I continued. We should address it directly. I turned to Adrian. Did you read the report? His expression flickered. Just for a second. No, he said. Mom said she. That's what I thought. I looked back at Evelyn. You called this brunch because you believe the test proves something, I said. So before we go any further, why don't you tell everyone what you think it says? That was the moment something shifted in her posture. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I did. Because I had spent months watching her. Measuring her. learning the difference between her confidence and her performance of it. She set her glass down. The results were inconclusive, she said carefully, which, given the circumstances, raises serious questions. Inconclusive. Not false. Not definitive. Inconclusive. That's interesting, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single folded document. Printed. Clean. Unmarked. I placed it on the table in front of me, because I had learned something from Evelyn Mercer. If you want people to believe something, you don't rush. You let them come to it. I spoke to the clinic this morning, I said. That wasn't a lie. I asked them to send me a copy directly. Another pause. This one heavier. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. You went behind our backs? She asked. No, I said calmly. I made sure I had the full information. That was the moment the room divided. Not into sides. Into awareness. Some people leaned forward. Others leaned back. Laurel's fingers tightened around her glass. Charles finally looked up. Adrian. Adrian was staring at the table. That should have been my 10th clue. But I didn't need clues anymore. I had something better. Would you like me to read it? I asked. Evelyn straightened slightly. That won't be necessary. I've already. I think it is necessary, I said. Not louder. Just final. And for the first time since I had known her, she didn't interrupt me. I unfolded the paper. Slowly. Not for effect. For precision. Because every second mattered now. Every word. Every breath. The test confirms, I began, with 99% probability, that Adrian Mercer is the biological father of this child. Silence. Real silence this time. Not curated. Not controlled. Just empty. Evelyn didn't move. Laurel blinked. Charles's hand stopped halfway to his glass. Adrian looked up. Finally. And for a moment, I almost stopped there. Because that alone would have been enough. Enough to clear my name. Enough to expose the accusation. Enough to end the humiliation she had tried to build. But that wasn't even the worst part. I let the silence sit. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then I continued. There's a second finding. Evelyn's head lifted slightly. What second finding? She asked. And there it was. The first crack. Small. But irreversible. I looked directly at her. The test also flagged a genetic inconsistency, I said. No one spoke. No one moved. 'Cause now they were listening. Specifically, I continued, it indicates that Adrian does not share a full biological match with one of his listed parents. That was the moment everything broke. Not loudly. Quietly. Irreversibly. Evelyn's face didn't collapse. It froze. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from control, but from impact. That's not possible, she said. The words came out too quickly. Too sharp. Too certain. And that was the problem. Because certainty without verification is just exposure waiting to happen. The report suggests, I said carefully, that Adrian is not genetically related to you. The room didn't react all at once. It unraveled. Laurel let out a small involuntary sound. Charles closed his eyes. Adrian stared at me like I had just rewritten something fundamental about his existence. And Evelyn didn't blink. For a full 3 seconds. That should have been impossible. But it wasn't. Because in that moment, she wasn't processing new information. She was recognizing it. That was the difference. And I saw it. The exact second she realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a truth she had spent decades making sure never surfaced. That's inaccurate, she said finally. Not defensive. Not emotional. Strategic. They must have made an error. Then we can retest, I replied. Simple. Clean. Unavoidable. No, she said. Too fast. There it was again. That instinct to control the direction of the conversation. To steer it away from places she couldn't dominate. Adrian stood up. Slowly. Mom. His voice was different now. Not weak. Not deflecting. Uncertain. And something else. Something I hadn't heard from him before. Awake. What is she talking about? He asked. Evelyn turned to him. And for the first time in her life, she didn't have an answer ready. That test is flawed, she said. It's not, I replied. I slid the paper across the table, toward him. Look at the markers, I said. The clinic verified them twice. He didn't move right away. Then, like someone stepping into cold water, he reached for it. Read. Once. Then again. Slower. More carefully. Charles spoke without opening his eyes. When? He asked. One word. But it carried weight. History. Suspicion. Recognition. Evelyn didn't respond. Laurel was staring at her now. Not confused. Not shocked. Something closer to reevaluation. Like she was looking at her mother and seeing someone else layered underneath. Mom, Adrian said again. And this time, there was no softness in it. Just demand. What is this? That was the moment everything shifted. Not because of the paper. Not because of the DNA. But because for the first time, the narrative Evelyn Mercer had controlled for decades was no longer hers to manage, and everyone in that room knew it. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to, because the truth had already done what it always does when it's finally given space. It didn't shout. It didn't argue. It didn't defend itself. It simply remained. And in that room, that was enough. But the story didn't end there, because what Evelyn said next changed everything. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked at Adrian, not at the paper, not at me, not at anyone else in the room, at him. And for the first time since I had known her, she looked unsure of what version of herself to be. That was the moment I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. Control only works as long as the story holds. And hers had just fractured. Sit down, she said quietly. Not to the room. To him. Adrian didn't move. Answer me, he said. No softness. No hesitation. Just demand. The kind of tone I had waited 2 years to hear from him. Evelyn inhaled slowly, then reached for her glass of champagne. Her hand was steady. Of course it was. Women like her didn't shake in front of an audience. But she didn't drink. She just held it, like it gave her something to do while she recalibrated. That test, she said, choosing each word with care, is being misinterpreted. No, I replied. It isn't. She ignored me. Of course she did. Adrian, she continued, her voice softening just enough to sound maternal. Genetics can be complicated. There are variations, anomalies. When? Charles asked again, this time louder. He opened his eyes, and whatever had been sitting behind them was no longer passive. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't curiosity. It was confirmation. That was the moment the room shifted for the second time. Not toward me, toward him. Because whatever this was, Charles Mercer had suspected it before this afternoon. And now it was no longer something he could ignore. Evelyn turned to him. Charles, this is not the time. No, he said. Just that. No explanation. No build-up. Just a boundary. And it landed harder than anything that had been said all afternoon. Adrian looked between them, then back at the paper, then at his mother. What is he talking about? He asked. Silence. Real silence. The kind that doesn't invite interruption. The kind that forces an answer. Evelyn set her glass down. Carefully. Deliberately. Because if she was going to lose control of the story, she was going to choose how. It was before you were born, she said. The words were quiet, but they carried. Everywhere. Laurel's hand covered her mouth. Charles looked away. And Adrian didn't blink. What was before I was born? He asked. Evelyn's eyes flicked to me for half a second. Just half. But I caught it. 'Cause now, I was part of the equation she had to manage. And she didn't like that. There were complications, she said. With what? With your father. Charles laughed. Not loud. Not amused. Just sharp. That's one way to put it, he said. Evelyn's jaw tightened. This is not your moment to rewrite history. History doesn't need rewriting, he replied. Just telling. Adrian stepped back from the table, like the ground under him had shifted and he needed space to understand where he was standing. Someone explain this to me, he said. No one moved. No one rushed to fill the silence. Because for the first time, No one knew what the right version of the truth was supposed to be. And that was the problem. Because this family had always operated on controlled versions of reality. Curated. Managed. Adjusted. But now, there was no version that held. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Just a second. Then opened them again. It was one time, she said. The room reacted this time. Not loudly, but undeniably. Laurel's chair scraped slightly against the floor. Charles exhaled. And Adrian just stood there. Still. Processing. It was a mistake, she continued. A long time ago. Before everything settled. Before the business expanded. Before you built the narrative, Charles said. She turned on him. This is not about you. It never was, he replied. That landed hard. Because now the structure was clear. Not all of it. But enough. Adrian looked at his father. Then at his mother. Then back at the paper. And finally, at me. And in that moment, I saw something break. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The version of his life he had always believed in. What are you saying? He asked. No one answered. Because no one wanted to be the one to say it. So I did. Not out of cruelty. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. The test didn't just confirm the baby is yours, I said. My voice was calm. Steady. Controlled. It confirmed that your DNA doesn't match Evelyn's. I let that sit. Then added gently. That means she isn't your biological mother. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Evelyn didn't correct me. That was the answer. Adrian's hand tightened around the edge of the table. Then who is? He asked. And that was the question Evelyn Mercer had spent 34 years making sure no one ever asked. She didn't answer right away. Of course she didn't. Because this wasn't just a secret. It was a foundation. And once foundations crack, everything built on top of them starts to shift. Laurel, she said suddenly. Laurel flinched. What? She whispered. Evelyn looked at her. Not with affection. Not with protection. With calculation. You need to leave, she said. That was the moment I understood something else. This wasn't just about Adrian. It was bigger. Messier. And far more deliberate than a single mistake. Because Evelyn wasn't trying to protect him. She was trying to contain something. And whatever it was, Laurel was part of it. No, Adrian said. The word came out stronger this time. Clearer. No one is leaving until I understand what's happening. Evelyn's composure cracked. Just slightly. But enough. You don't understand the implications, she said. I understand enough, he replied. And for the first time, she didn't have control of him. That was the real turning point. Not the DNA. Not the accusation. Not even the humiliation. This moment. Where the person she had shaped her entire life around controlling, stopped listening, and started asking. I sat there quietly, watching, not intervening, because this was no longer about me. And that was the final shift. I wasn't the problem anymore. I wasn't the narrative. I wasn't even the target. I was just the person who had brought the truth into the room. And now, they had to live with it. Evelyn looked around the table. At the people she had carefully curated for this moment. At the witnesses she had chosen. At the audience she had intended to control. And for the first time, she realized she couldn't. It wasn't supposed to come out like this, she said. And that was the closest thing to an admission she had ever made. But it wasn't enough. Because the truth doesn't settle for partial explanations. It waits. Until it's complete. And Adrian wasn't going to stop now. Who is my mother? He asked again. This time, there was no way around it. And whatever Evelyn said next, was going to end the story she had spent decades protecting, and start a new one she couldn't control. Evelyn didn't look at him when she answered. She looked at the table, at the linen, at the glassware, at the careful symmetry she had built into this room, anywhere but his face. Her name was Marissa, she said. The word was landed harder than the name. Adrian didn't sit down. Was, he repeated. Evelyn's fingers pressed together, the slightest tremor at the tips now. Not enough for most people to notice. But I did. She died, Evelyn said. Years ago. Charles let out a breath that sounded like something being released under pressure. Convenient, he muttered. Evelyn's head snapped toward him. Don't. I'm not the one who brought an audience to this, he said. You did. That was the second crack. The first had been the DNA. The second was the realization that the story she had prepared didn't account for him speaking. Adrian stepped closer to the table. Start at the beginning, he said. Not angry. Not pleading. Just precise. The way you ask a question when you already know you're not going to like the answer. Evelyn inhaled. You were born early, she began. There were complications. I couldn't carry to term. That's not the beginning, Charles said. Evelyn ignored him. We had options, she continued. The best doctors. The best care. We made a decision that would protect the family and give you a stable life. Protect the family. Not protect the child. That distinction mattered. Whose decision? Adrian asked. Evelyn hesitated. Charles answered for her. Hers, he said. Always hers. Evelyn's jaw tightened. It was our decision, she corrected. No, Charles said. It was your solution. Solution. The word sat in the air like something clinical. Something engineered. Adrian looked at me. Just for a second. Not for permission. For orientation. Like he needed to confirm that the ground hadn't disappeared completely. I didn't speak. I just held his gaze. Because this part he had to walk through himself. Marissa, he said. Who was she? Evelyn closed her eyes again. Longer this time. When she opened them, something in her had shifted. Not softer. More direct. She was a donor, she said. Charles laughed again. This time louder. Say it properly, he said. For once in your life, say it properly. Evelyn turned to him. I am. No, you're not, he said. A donor implies distance. Consent. Contracts. That's not what happened. Laurel stood up abruptly. I don't want to hear this, she said. No one stopped her. But she didn't leave. She just stood there. Frozen. Because even she understood that walking out now wouldn't undo what had already been said. Adrian's voice cut through the room. Then what happened? Charles looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time since I had known him, there was something like regret in his expression. She worked for us, he said. Evelyn's eyes snapped back to him. Enough, she said. No, he replied. Not anymore. He turned back to Adrian. She was 24, he said. Worked in the office. Temporary staff. Smart. Quiet. The kind of person your mother didn't notice, until she had to. The room felt smaller. Tighter. Because now the truth wasn't abstract. It was forming. Piece by piece. She got pregnant, Charles continued. Evelyn stood. Stop, she said. No, Adrian said. And that was it. That was the moment. Not when the DNA result came back. Not when Evelyn made the accusation. This. When Adrian chose not to protect her version of the story. When he chose the truth over the structure he had been raised inside. Charles didn't hesitate. She got pregnant, he repeated. And your mother decided that was a problem she could solve. Evelyn's voice dropped. Cold. Controlled. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, he replied. I've just never said it out loud before. That was the third crack. And this one didn't stop. Adrian's hand moved to the back of a chair, steadying himself. You're telling me, he said slowly, that I'm not your biological child, and that my actual mother was someone who worked for you. Evelyn didn't answer, because she didn't need to. Silence confirmed it. But you raised me, he said. Yes, she replied immediately. I raised you. I gave you everything. I built your life. Built. Again. Not gave birth. Not loved. Built. That's not the same thing, he said. The words landed harder than anything else that afternoon. Because they weren't emotional. They were factual. And facts don't bend. Evelyn's composure finally slipped. Just a fraction. I did what was necessary, she said. Necessary. Another word that tries to justify something it can't undo. For who? I asked. The question came out before I planned it. Not sharp. Not accusatory. Just present. Because I needed to understand. And more importantly, because she needed to hear it. Evelyn looked at me. Really looked at me. And for the first time, there was no dismissal in her expression. No superiority. Just recognition. For all of us, she said. I shook my head. No, I said quietly. For control. The room didn't react. But she did. A small shift. A tightening. Because she understood that I wasn't guessing anymore. I was seeing her. Clearly. And once someone is seen like that, they lose something. Not power. Precision. Adrian stepped back. Further now. Creating distance. Not just physically. Structurally. I need to know everything, he said. Evelyn exhaled. Long, slow. Like she was letting go of something she had been holding for years. She didn't want to give you up, she said. That was the fourth crack. And this one hurt. Not just for him. For me too. 'Cause now, the story wasn't about control. It was about choice. And whose mattered? She wasn't supposed to keep the pregnancy, Evelyn continued. There were agreements. Expectations. But she changed her mind. Her name was Marissa, Adrian said. Stop calling her she. Evelyn's lips pressed together. She became emotional, she said. Charles closed his eyes again. Of course she did, he said quietly. She became unstable, Evelyn corrected. There it was. The narrative. Rewriting. Even now. She became a mother, I said. Evelyn didn't respond. Because she couldn't. Not without losing the last piece of control she had left. And then what? Adrian asked. Silence. Then she died, Evelyn said again. The same sentence. But it felt different this time. Heavier. Incomplete. 'Cause now, everyone in the room knew that wasn't the full story. Why do I feel like that's not the whole truth? Adrian said. Because it wasn't. And Evelyn knew it. And Charles knew it. And now? So did I. The room held its breath. Waiting. 'Cause whatever came next was going to decide what kind of truth this really was. The kind that explains. Or the kind that exposes. And Evelyn Mercer had spent her entire life making sure those two things never overlapped. Until now. Evelyn didn't answer him right away. She looked at the far wall. At a framed photograph from a gala 5 years ago. Her in cream, Charles in black tie, Adrian between them, smiling in a way that now felt constructed. Like a version of him that had been taught. That's not the whole truth, Adrian said again. Quieter this time. But sharper. Because now he wasn't asking. He was narrowing. Evelyn inhaled. Slow. Measured. She had complications, she said. After the birth. There were issues. Infection. That's not what I asked, he interrupted. And the room stilled. Because that wasn't something Adrian did. Interrupt her. Not like that. Not without cushioning it in apology or explanation. He didn't do that anymore. When? He asked. When did she die? Evelyn's eyes flicked to Charles. For just a second. But it was enough. Because Charles didn't look back. He just said quietly, tell him. That was the 5th crack. And this one split everything open. Evelyn's composure shifted. Not shattered. Not yet. But something in it loosened. She didn't die immediately, she said. No one moved. No one spoke. 'Cause now the truth was coming in pieces she hadn't prepared. She stayed in the hospital for a few weeks, Evelyn continued. Then she was discharged. Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper. So she was alive. Yes. How long? Evelyn hesitated. There it was. The final resistance. Months, she said. The word hit the room like something physical. Months. Not hours. Not days. Months. Adrian's hand dropped from the chair. Where? He asked. Silence. Then, in a facility, she said. A facility, he repeated. For recovery, Evelyn clarified quickly. She wasn't stable. The doctors recommended. Which facility? He asked. Evelyn didn't answer. Because she couldn't. Not without collapsing the last version of the story she still had control over. Charles did. Westbrook, he said. The name landed. Quiet. Precise. Final. Adrian turned to him. And you knew. Charles nodded once. I knew she was there. And you left her there? The question wasn't accusatory. That's what made it worse. It was factual. Measured. Like he was assembling something piece by piece and didn't want to distort it with emotion. I visited, Charles said. Evelyn turned sharply. You said you wouldn't. I said I wouldn't tell him, he replied. I didn't say I wouldn't remember. That was the moment Evelyn lost it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. You don't understand what that would have done, she said. To the family, to him, to everything we built. There it is, I said quietly. She looked at me. Sharp. Defensive. What? Everything we built, I repeated. Not everything you destroyed. The room didn't react. But she did. 'Cause now, there was no version of this where she looked right. Only versions where she looked revealed. Adrian stepped back again. Further this time. Until there was space between him and the table. Between him and her. Did she try to see me? He asked. The question was soft. Almost fragile. And it cut deeper than anything else he had said. Evelyn's lips parted. Closed. Then yes, she said. The word barely made it out. How many times? No answer. How many times? He repeated. Several, she said. Several, he echoed. Like he was testing how the word felt in his mouth. Like he needed to understand its weight. And you stopped her. It wasn't a question. Evelyn didn't deny it. I protected you, she said. From what? That's what she meant. From instability. From chaos. From a life that didn't fit the one she had already decided he would live. But that's not what he heard. You protected yourself, he said. And that was the final shift. 'Cause now, he wasn't asking for answers anymore. He was assigning truth. And Evelyn had nothing left to reshape it with. What happened to her? He asked. Evelyn didn't respond. Not immediately. Because this was the last piece. The one she had avoided. The one she had rewritten. The one that didn't fit into any version of the story she could control. Charles spoke. She left, he said. Evelyn turned on him. That's not. She left, he repeated. After 6 months. Against your advice. Against your conditions. She signed the papers and walked out. The room held its breath. 'Cause that changed everything. She didn't die, Adrian said. No one answered. Because no one needed to. She's alive. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Evelyn closed her eyes. Just for a second. Then opened them. And for the first time since this started, she didn't correct him. That was the answer. Adrian's entire body shifted. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But fundamentally. Because the truth wasn't just painful anymore. It was incomplete in a different way. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Where is she? He asked. Evelyn shook her head. I don't know. Charles looked at her. Long measured. You do, he said. She didn't respond. Because she did. Of course she did. Women like Evelyn didn't lose track of variables. They archived them. Stored them. Controlled them. Even when they pretended they didn't matter anymore. Where is she? Adrian asked again. This time, there was something else in his voice. Not confusion. Not anger. Direction. And that was the part Evelyn couldn't control. Because this wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what he was going to do next. And for the first time, she wasn't part of that decision. I watched her. Carefully. Closely. Because this was the moment that defined everything. Not the accusation. Not the test. Not even the reveal. This. Where the person who had built her entire life around controlling the narrative realized the narrative was no longer hers. She's in New Mexico, Evelyn said finally. The words came out flat. Stripped. Like something she had held onto for years and was now forced to release. Albuquerque. Adrian didn't react right away. He just stood there. Letting it settle. Letting it take shape. Letting it become real. And then he nodded. Once. Slow. Decisive. I'm going to find her, he said. Evelyn's composure snapped back for a split second. You can't just. I can, he said. And that was it. No argument. No hesitation. Just action. The kind she couldn't anticipate. The kind she couldn't redirect. The kind that doesn't ask permission. I sat there quietly, watching, not intervening, because this had moved beyond me, beyond the humiliation, beyond the accusation, beyond even the DNA test. It had become something else entirely, a truth that didn't just expose the past, but rewrote the future. And for the first time since I walked into that family, I wasn't the one being judged. I wasn't the one being questioned. I wasn't the one being controlled. I was just the one who had stayed long enough to see it clearly and walk away from it without carrying any of it with me. Because in the end, the DNA test didn't just prove who my child belonged to. It proved something far more important, that the people who demand proof the loudest are usually the ones hiding the most. And once that kind of truth comes out, it doesn't need defending. It doesn't need explaining. It doesn't need revenge. It just needs space to exist. And when it does, everything else falls exactly where it was always meant to.